Okay, so we come back the next day and we have our prime coat is dry. I give it an overnight just because I don't want there to be any sort of bleed between our finish coat and our primer coat. And I also prepped this one. This was previously painted, but I didn't like it. It was painted with brush and the paint was kind of thick, so we're going to repaint it. So I've got that primed and ready to go. So most of your construction vehicles are going to be a boring yellow. There's very few exceptions, unless you go with like a rental piece of equipment. Some of those can be a little more colorful, and some larger companies will actually customize their paint. But in general, you're going to get whatever it comes out as the factory, and in our case, all of our models are going to be yellow. So I've got Vallejo medium yellow, number 71.002, loaded up in my paintbrush with a few drops of flow improver, and we're just going to go ahead and start applying our yellow. I like to do yellow first because it's going to be the hardest color to cover over, basically. So where we have details in black and in other colors, we're just going to add those later by brush. But for this particular phase, everything's getting a nice yellow coat, and we'll go back and detail them out later. So I'm using just light colors, light passes. We're going to hit them probably twice, just to get from sort of a dull yellow to a real yellow. I'm running just about 25 psi on my compressor, and I'm very barely giving it any paint because I kind of want this first coat to be just a passing coat, just to get us something for the future yellow coats to stick to. I have found, and I'm sure many of you have, that when you're working with your airbrush, you get much better results when you go lower and slower, basically. So we're going to hit it with multiple coats here, and we're going to hit all of the vehicles with our yellow, and then we'll come back for our detailing. Okay, now that we've got our basic yellow paint scheme down, we are going to start working on the details. So I'm not going to show you detailing all of the vehicles. I'm just going to show you detailing the rock truck, just so you get an idea of how I do it. It's going to be similar to what everybody else is going to do. I mean, you got to paint it right. So I've taken the rock truck, got my yellow on here. That's my base color, and then everything I'm going to do, I'm going to add on top of this. And we've put the airbrush away. We're done with the airbrush. Can't really get fine details this small with the airbrush. And I know, yeah, you can, but it's a lot of masking, a lot of careful work, and it's just easier to hit it with a brush. So what I did is I went online and I found, from the Volvo website, I found what the actual vehicle looks like. There it is. You can click it for more images right there. But this is what I'm going to use to paint this truck, and it is the smallest of the rock trucks apparently that Volvo offers. But gives you an idea here what we're working with and what we're doing. So coming back here, obviously I've got to paint this cab black, to make that look like it. I've got to get the mud flaps, the hydraulic cylinder covers, and everything else here, tires, all painted black. So what I like to do on a model like this is I like to paint it like it's factory new, and then I take it from factory new settings and I dirty it up and weather it afterwards. I find that if you try to do the weathering while you're painting, it doesn't give you the same results and it doesn't look as good. So it's just easier for me to go back in and paint it the way I want it as far as weathering after I get the basic color down. So just using Vallejo colors once again, 70.950 black. So nothing surprising there. Gonna take I take my small brush here, which is buried underneath my loader, and we're going to start detailing. I don't think it really matters where you start on this thing, just so long as you don't stick your finger on your wet paint. But we're just going to hit this mud flap here, and then we're going to keep on trucking. And we want to be careful in this phase because we don't want to get any paint color that doesn't belong, on the yellow, because then you've got to go back and you've got to touch up the yellow, and you end up sort of doing that by brush, and then it looks a little bit different because the brush puts the paint on thicker, and it's really just better if you take your time, use the smaller brush, and get it right the first time. Keep in mind how your model is going to be viewed. So if it's viewed at a lower elevation, where you're going to see more of the top of the vehicle, then you can probably skip on spending too much time on the underside. But if it's going to be sitting on an upper deck where it's going to be more at eye level, or it's going to be more, likely that someone will see it from underneath, then you want to spend more time on the underside, making sure that all of those details are painted. So you can obviously treat the model as a museum piece and paint everything. That's your choice. But my preference is to be a little more conservative with my painting, just to conserve paint and time. So I'm going to paint what I know is most likely going to be seen. So I know in the earlier videos that I had said, or the earlier segments of this video, I had said, prime the underside and paint the underside. And you do want to, you want to do that. It's just a matter of how much detail you put into it is what I'm saying. So you don't want to leave it plastic white, because it will inevitably show. And so how I take the airbrush approach is I basically spray it in fours. So I'll spray it from above, I'll spray it from the front, and then the two sides, and get that all done, and then I go underneath and get that sprayed as well. And what I find by spraying it all the way around in a 3D space, basically, you pretty much cover all of the areas that need to be painted. There's always some little detail areas that don't get sprayed, and you have to go back and hit those at some weird angle. But for the most part, if you hit it from top, bottom, left, right, front, back, it'll cover everything. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and speed this video part up here so you don't have to watch me painting this entire model in real time. And we'll see you back here with the finished model. So in some of these models, you get lucky and you have an open cab vehicle where you don't need any sort of glass, and you can see right into the operator's cab. And in some of them they detail them, some of them they don't, and that's fine. And in some of them, like your vehicles, your service trucks here, they just don't have any glass in the window openings. But on the ones where you have a solid molded plastic, piece there, resin piece, you've got to do something with it to make it look like glass. You can't leave it painted incorrectly. So for that, I just used gray blue Vallejo color number 70.943, and that gives us the impression of a there's something there, and I've got some light reflecting off of it, so that doesn't look too terribly bad. I am going to hit it with a little bit of a gloss varnish afterwards, so it has a little bit of a shine. It's wet, so I'm going to let it dry, but that is how I handle models that have molded on glass parts. So it doesn't look terrible. It looks appropriate, so when you detail it out, it sort of just fades away, but it takes care of the cabs that you don't have clear glass in. Okay, so now we've got our models basically painted, as you saw in the previous segment here. And at this point, we are down to the fine detailing to make it look like it belongs on a construction site. So what we want to do is take our truck that looks like this and make it look a little bit more like this. Now, I'm not doing anything here that you guys probably haven't seen on a million other channels. You can, if you so desire, get into some pretty intense weathering with these things, but basically all I'm going to do is take a weathering brush, and I am going to add the dirt and grime, starting with my darkest, working to my lightest, where the dirt and grime would usually build up on these vehicles. And I'm just using pan pastel colors here. I also have some Monroe weathering powders on the back to add some variation, but basically everywhere that is going to have some dirt and grime on it, I'm going to go ahead and hit. Now, we're trying to give the impression that these vehicles are active on the job site, so they're going to have some mud, some dirt, and some other things caked onto them here. So we're going to go ahead and represent all that. Now, one thing that I will tell you is you can go pretty crazy in this phase, even at N scale. And if you have some of the, say, the AK Interactive, those acrylic terrain pastes and stuff, you can put mud on the tires and everything like that. And I'm going to do that. So I'm going to do that after I get the basic coating on here, putting the dust and the dirt where I think it would be on these models. If you have reference photos, that's always your best bet to see how mud typically cakes on these vehicles. But You know, in general, anywhere that's moving your tires, anywhere that it could splash, you know, gunk up onto the vehicle, that's going to be where you know, where your mud and your dirt is going to be stacked. So don't be too afraid to get in there and get a little bit heavier in those areas, and also you can sort of you know, go a little bit wild with it. These things are not going to be clean coming out onto a job site. So you know, something like that, and then we'll add some mud and some dirt. But I'm going to go ahead and powder the rest of these guys up, and then we'll add the detail mud on here in just a second. Okay, folks. So this next step comes with a word of caution, and that word of caution is that you can very quickly overdo this step. And if you do that, you can fix it, just like most models, but it's not particularly easy to fix. So be careful with this next step. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a couple of products here. This is Terrain's Wet Ground Acrylic. It is from AK Interactive, and it is number 8016. And we're also going to use same product here, Terrain's Muddy Ground. They are different. This is AK 8017. Now, I start with the wet ground. It is a darker color, and I hit the areas where you know, some mud and some debris might be gathering. Then I also put it in the bed of the truck, and you kind of notice I got this big old blob back here. So material sometimes gets stuck in the back of the truck, especially if it's wet. If it's dry, it pretty much slides right out, but if it's wet, it'll glob up in corners. And even though the equipment is designed to, you know, let this out, enough wet material being dumped in here eventually will build up a bit of a mess in the truck. So it's probably a little thicker than I want, so I'm going to spread it out a little bit, try to get some of it, you know, up into the corners here and work it out. But and then don't forget, this material is sliding out, so you want to give it that impression that it is, you know, been dumped and some stuff has slid over it and bounced over it. So you want to keep that streak moving in that direction. Now, what I said you could do too much of is, this is a fun technique to put on your trucks and your vehicles, and even in N scale, it makes a pretty good impression on, you know, what your vehicle looks like. But it's pretty thick. It's a very thick acrylic paste, and so, you know, you can get carried away with it pretty quick. So I take a small brush and just sort of brush this on. It will let you glob it up if you want, if that's the desire, you know, that you're going for. But basically, all I want to do is get it in some areas where mud will have splashed while working on the site. And because I'm modeling a Western Pennsylvania site, those of you familiar with the area know that you know, we pretty much just have wet weather all the time. Not quite like Seattle, but it's just our sunny days are not outnumbered by the, or are greatly outnumbered by the cloudy days, and the days with precipitation. So we just sort of gonna live with that. So what I want to do is I want to simulate that our construction equipment is working in some wet mud. And don't forget too, your site may also have some water on it, especially if you've got crews that are like masons or concrete guys that are using water. What they'll do is they'll dump and clean out their trucks all over the place, and you end up with kind of a sloppy mess. We do have to contain that mess, because otherwise the DEP gets cranky, and they're a pain in the ass to deal with. So we try not to make them cranky for that simple fact. But in any event, we need to you know, simulate the mud and the grime and the dirt on our vehicle. So we want to make it look like we've ran through some puddles. Now, take a look at your equipment and where you're going to be using it. So my rock truck, my articulating dump truck, is going to be running back and forth on the site. It's going to be in the mud. My excavator this one's going to have a little bit of mud because you can see that it's kind of in what I'll call a sleeping position, boom down. So it's either getting ready to get loaded onto a lowboy truck, or it's done for the day and the operator you know, tucked it all away. So that's not a typical position for a vehicle at rest. Usually it's more of a position like this, but you know, that's how we're going to use this one because it's not unreasonable. This is going to be my main workhorse, so I put a little bit more mud on him like he's been tracking around. And the other thing you got to remember is your vehicles have multiple sides, right? And both your sides are not necessarily going to be muddied the same. So, take a look at that. Where the vehicle is. You may have a side that's sitting in a puddle, and a side that's not sitting in a puddle. So we're going to model. We can model that too. So my dozer, same deal. He's going to be, working out in the mud there. So I want to put a little bit of a globby texture on him, and I want to rough up this texture a little bit. And I'm just using my brush here to kind of dab and poke at it to give it sort of that globby, muddy look. But I want that, on the lower tracks and on the blades. He wasn't using his ripper today, so his ripper doesn't have any mud on it. But that's what I was going for there. So I've got my vehicles that have been working for the day. Your work trucks, your company trucks, they also need to have a little bit of mud on them. Now they're probably not going to be splashing through as much mud because they're not nearly as rugged as your crawler vehicles. So they're not going to be jumping through puddles, but they get mud splashed up on them. So unless your truck is sitting up on the highway, it's got to have some dirt on it. Now, weathering for the compactor and the compactor, the roller, whatever you want to call it, and your grader is gonna be a little bit different. So these guys are working on top of our stone base, so they are getting stone dust on them. So I weathered them with just a white powder. It's kind of like an off-white cream powder because they're gonna have that dust is gonna kick up and it gets on everything. So they're not gonna have mud on them. They're not going in the mud. They are working strictly on the stone, and so we want them to look and be weathered differently. So I know that's a small detail, and for many of you that might be too much detail, but that is how those vehicles would look on the job site. So we want to weather them. The more weathering you put on, the better you can hide imperfections in the 3D printing process or even bad paint job. So don't be afraid to get your vehicles dirty. But at the same time, a lot of companies will either purchase equipment or more commonly rent it during the course of the job. And when they do that, your equipment comes out and it's nice, new, and it's shiny. So if you wanted to model a low boy delivering a brand new excavator, clean it up a little bit more, that would look really cool. So if you wanted to do something like this excavator here, and have him have a low boy on the site and have him nice and clean, you could very easily represent a new piece of equipment. And every time a new piece of equipment is arrived on one of my job sites, I can tell you that the owner of that piece of equipment usually has about half the company standing around looking at it. So, new toys. So you can model that, absolutely. But let's take these vehicles now and sort of incorporate them into the scenery that we started in the last video. Okay, coming back over to the layout now, and we're going to work a little bit more on the scenery. And what you're looking at here is the area where we're going to have our more finished part of the job site, so our gravel base. And what I want to do is, it's very difficult to get the gravel to lay level, just because you're going to add water and then you're going to do the scenic glue and it bubbles up a little bit. So I got it as level as I could, and then I'm just going to use this sanding block, now that this is all glued in, to just sand this down. Now, I'm not looking for perfection with this stage. I'm just trying to knock down some of these higher areas. And what this does is it gives your gravel a little bit more of a uniform look. And, it smoothed it out. And, of course, this is kind of stuck together with the glue. So it makes it smooths out the top. And you get an effect, and I'll show you here in just a minute, that looks exactly like well compacted gravel, and that's exactly what this needs to look like. So just taking our fan brush, and we're gonna brush some of this loose material out of the way. And I knocked down some of the high spots. You can always go back and knock it down a little bit more. I would work in smaller areas and, check your work, because if you knock it down too much or you kind of funk it up, then it's a little bit more difficult to go back and add. But to give you an idea what that's going to look like, that's what it looks like. And I know you're saying, well, it doesn't look too much different, but trust me, it does, and that is the look that we're going for. Okay, so now we are laying out our equipment and putting it where we want to see it on the layout. And I know that probably most of you would set your vehicle at this point and walk away. Well, obviously, that's not what we're going to do, because if that's what we were going to do, I wouldn't be leading you this way, right? So we need to make these vehicles look like they're part of the scenery, not just set on top of the layout. And this is something that you want to do with all of your vehicles, not just if you're trying to build a specific scene, right? So your vehicles, much like your trains, your people, your buildings, they're part of a story. They're telling a story. They're doing something on your layout. So when we just take them and we put them next to something else, say like this excavator next to these pipes, okay, you get the idea that you don't know exactly what he's doing, but he's working on these pipes, right? Okay, so when you come over here and you see this, you see your support vehicle, and you see this machine tucked down. So maybe something's going on with this piece of equipment, and this guy is here trying to troubleshoot that, which could be something as simple as changing a filter, hydraulic fluid. Maybe it's something more serious and they got to call in additional support vehicles. You don't know. Okay, so now because this machine is out, does that take our rock truck out of service? So maybe he's sitting off to the side here. He can't really do much, right? You can set that up into these little scenes. Now, we slide on down here. Okay, so we've got a white pickup truck, probably a site superintendent or a project manager. You've got your road reclaimer, soil stabilizer. He's going out ahead of these guys, right? Because he's going to be getting your ground prepped. So that makes sense there. Your grader's going to be working on getting this stone in place. And then your compactor is working on smoothing that all out. Now, we've added another component here. We've got a lowboy. This is from a previous 3D printed order, both the lowboy trailer and the tractor. And we have our asphalt paver here, who's sitting off to the side, kind of in the dirt. So this is telling us a story here. Okay, so these guys are obviously getting ready for pavement. So you would think that the pavement crews are going to be in within the next couple of weeks. So ahead of that, they're starting to stage their equipment. The first piece to arrive is the paver. So, it's staged off to the side here in the mud, in the dirt. Doesn't matter. It's out of the way because they're not quite ready for it yet. But, now you've got that sort of little vignette going on here where, he's probably going back. He's got to bring some compactors in. Maybe he's bringing another paver in. Depends. But you could tell that there's something going on. These are starting to tell a story. So now what we need to do, not only in setting them up, we also need to get them so that they are situated a little bit better. You notice that these are kind of rocking, right? So you got tires that are not on the ground. We need to take our scenery material and make it match what's going on here. So that's going to be our next step.